She lived in a perfect house, but it was filled with silence. Pregnant and isolated, she felt something wasn't right, until a simple request nearly killed her, and what looked like an accident was just the beginning of something much bigger. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Madison always imagined married life would be different. Not like this. Not with this heavy silence that filled every room of their Naperville house, a home with a flawless facade in the Willows at River Run, a gated community where the sidewalks were cleaned every morning and the neighbors smiled politely without ever asking too many questions. At 28, 7 months pregnant with her second child, Madison walked slowly through the living room, rocking Liam, her 1.5-year-old, who was finally drifting off in her arms. Her prominent belly made every movement a calculated challenge. She stopped in front of the large window overlooking the front yard. The lawn was perfect, as always. The rose bushes she'd planted herself in their first year of marriage were blooming in shades of red and pink. The white picket fence gleamed under the afternoon sun. From the outside, it all looked like a dream, but Madison hadn't dreamed in a long, long time. She sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her accumulated exhaustion. Her back ached, her legs were swollen, and the loneliness she felt was as physical as the child growing inside her. She gently placed Liam in his crib and went back to the kitchen, where the lunch dishes were still waiting in the sink. Rick had left right after eating, claiming he had important clients to show properties to in the area. As a real estate agent, he always had some urgent appointment. Or so he said. Madison turned on the faucet and began washing the dishes with mechanical movements. Her mind drifted to a time that felt like another life. She had graduated with honors in interior design, worked at a renowned firm in Chicago, and created projects that were featured in specialty magazines. She had talent, everyone said. She had a future. And then she met Rick Thompson at a networking event 6 years ago. He was everything she hadn't expected to find that night, tall with an easy smile and attentive eyes that seemed to see beyond her words. Rick had a gift for making anyone feel special. He won her over with small, constant gestures, flowers for no reason, handwritten notes, dinners at charming restaurants where he always ordered her favorite wine. Madison fell for him too fast, too deep. The wedding happened a year later in a small but elegant ceremony. The move to Naperville came soon after. Rick argued it was better for his business, that the competition in Chicago was brutal, that they would have a quieter life here. Madison agreed. After all, she could work from anywhere, couldn't she? She could start her own firm, take on local clients. She had plans, but the plans crumbled like sand through her fingers. First came the pregnancy with Liam. A happy surprise, of course. Rick was ecstatic. He insisted she needed to rest, that she shouldn't stress herself out with work. Madison agreed to take a break. After Liam was born, the routine became so intense she barely had time to think about projects, and when she finally started considering a return, she found out she was pregnant again. Madison turned off the faucet and dried her hands on a dish towel. She looked around the impeccable kitchen, with its white cabinets and granite countertops, all chosen by her, of course, but even so, it didn't feel like hers. Nothing in that house truly felt like hers. Her cell phone buzzed. It was a text from Rick. "Gonna be late. Important client meeting. Don't wait up for dinner." Madison sighed. Another night alone. She typed a short reply and put the phone away. She went to the fridge and pulled out ingredients to make something simple. As she chopped vegetables, her mind went back to the last few months, or was it years? It was hard to pinpoint exactly when things started to change. Rick had always been attentive, but gradually that attention morphed into something else. He started asking about every call she received. He wanted to know who she was talking to, what they were talking about. At first, Madison thought it was kind of cute. Jealousy, she thought, a sign of love. But then he started suggesting she didn't need to keep so many contacts from Chicago, that those old friendships only brought unnecessary nostalgia, that she had a new life now, a family, the passwords, that was another thing. Rick insisted on having access to her bank passwords, arguing it was more practical for managing the family's finances. Madison hesitated but eventually gave in. After all, they were married, right? They were supposed to share everything. Then he suggested she didn't need to use the car so much. The community had everything they needed nearby. He could drive her wherever she needed to go. It was safer that way, with her being pregnant. Little by little, Madison realized her freedom was being enclosed by an invisible net of reasonable justifications. What really bothered her, though, was Jessica. Jessica Miller had appeared in their lives about 2 years ago. Rick met her at a gym and soon began praising her work as a personal trainer. He said she was great, that she was helping him stay in shape. Madison thought it was normal, until Rick suggested Jessica could help her too. She could give her tips on safe exercises for pregnant women, monitor her diet, be a friend. Jessica was everything Madison wasn't. Tall, athletic, with that air of confidence that came from someone who never doubted their own worth. Her blonde hair was always perfect. Her tanned skin glowed with health. She was 25 and spoke with a fluency that made Madison feel small and uninteresting. At first, Jessica was friendly. She brought detox juices, talked about nutrition, offered advice on how to stay in shape even while pregnant. Madison even tried to like her, but there was something in Jessica's eyes that bothered her. A strange glint when she looked at Rick, an intimacy in their gestures that seemed to cross professional boundaries. Madison never said anything. How could she? Rick was as attentive to Jessica as he was to any client or colleague. And Madison felt guilty for even thinking badly of her. Maybe it was just insecurity. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones. Maybe she was going crazy. But in recent months, Jessica started showing up more. A lot more. She came for dinner. She'd pop in unannounced with excuses about being in the neighborhood. Rick thought it was natural. He said Jessica was a good friend, that Madison needed to be less jealous, and Madison swallowed the words she wanted to scream. Now, as she stirred the pot on the stove, Madison wondered how she had gotten here, how the confident, independent woman she used to be had transformed into this faded version of herself. When had she stopped recognizing her own voice? The baby inside her kicked hard, as if responding to her thoughts. Madison placed a hand on her belly and felt tears burn her eyes. She couldn't fall apart. She had Liam. She had another child on the way. She had to be strong. Her father called every week. Henry Wallace was a successful businessman, the kind who built an empire from scratch. He lived in Chicago and had a schedule that would make a senator jealous, but he always found time to call his daughter. And lately Madison could hear the growing concern in his voice. "Are you okay, honey? You sound different." "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired from the pregnancy." "When can I come visit? I want to see my grandson. It's been 3 months." "Soon, Dad. Rick's been really busy and the house is a mess with the renovations." Lies. Always lies. Rick made up excuses to avoid his father-in-law's visits. He said Henry was too controlling, that he interfered too much. Madison went along with it, postponing until months passed and she barely saw her father. But Henry Wallace was no fool. He had known his daughter since she learned to talk. He knew when something was wrong. And in their last few calls, his fatherly instinct was screaming alarms he couldn't ignore. Madison didn't know it, but Henry had already made a decision that would change everything. As dinner finished cooking, Madison sat at the kitchen table and pulled out an old sketchbook she kept in a drawer. It was filled with her design sketches, unfinished projects, deferred dreams. She ran her fingers over the pages with nostalgia. How long had it been since she'd last picked up a pen to create something? That's when she heard the front door open. She checked the clock. It was only 6 in the evening. Rick said he'd be late. She got up and went to the living room. Rick was walking in, and he wasn't alone. Jessica was right behind him, smiling that smile Madison hated so much. "Hey, honey," Rick said in that cheerful voice he used when he wanted to seem casual. "I ran into Jess on her way back from the gym. I invited her for dinner. You don't mind, do you?" Madison looked from one to the other. "No," she wanted to scream. "I do mind. I mind you invading the only moment of peace I have. I mind having this woman in my house when I can barely keep my eyes open from exhaustion. I mind the two of you sharing looks that I don't understand, but feel deep in my soul." But what she said was, "Of course not. I made enough food." Jessica walked in as if she owned the place. She sat on the sofa, crossed her legs, and started talking about her day as if Madison had asked. Rick went to check on Liam, and Madison returned to the kitchen with a lump in her throat. Dinner was tense, at least for Madison. Rick and Jessica chatted animatedly about gyms, clients, the real estate market. Madison ate in silence, pushing food around her plate, feeling like a stranger in her own home. At one point, when she got up to get some water, she heard Jessica whisper something to Rick. She couldn't make out the words, but she saw the look they exchanged, a look that confirmed all her darkest suspicions. When Jessica finally left, it was after 10 o'clock. Madison was exhausted. She went up to the bedroom while Rick locked up the house. She lay down in bed and closed her eyes, wishing sleep would come quickly. Rick came in a few minutes later. He lay down beside her and put his hand on her arm. "You're acting weird," he said. "Is something wrong?" Madison kept her eyes closed. "Just tired." "Jessica mentioned you've been distant with her. She's trying to be your friend, Madison. You could be a little more welcoming." Madison opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. "I am welcoming." "Doesn't seem like it." She felt anger boiling up, but she swallowed it. She always swallowed it. "I'm tired, Rick. Let's just go to sleep." He sighed, annoyed, and turned his back to her. Madison lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing even out as he slept. Her mind wouldn't stop. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She could feel it in the air, in the way Rick looked at her, in Jessica's smiles, in the coincidences that were too frequent to be casual. But what could she do? She was pregnant with a toddler, no money of her own, no car, no friends nearby. She was trapped. And the worst part was knowing she had walked into this prison willingly, door by door, lock by lock. When she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled with toppling cabinets, locking doors, and voices whispering words she couldn't understand. Across the city, Henry Wallace was awake in his office, staring at his computer screen. He had just hired a security company. The following week, technicians would install a discreet monitoring system in his daughter's house, hidden cameras that would stream everything directly to him. Henry knew he was invading Madison's privacy. But a father knows when he needs to protect his child, and every instinct he had was screaming that Madison was in danger. He just had no idea how right he was. The next few days passed in a suffocating normality. Madison took care of Liam, cleaned the house, prepared meals. Rick left early and came home late. Jessica showed up with increasing frequency, and Madison felt the trap closing in, though she couldn't explain exactly what was closing or why. Until, on a rainy Thursday in March, everything changed. Madison was in the living room, Liam on her lap, when Rick came home early. He had Jessica with him as usual, but there was something different in the air, a tension Madison could almost touch. "Madison," Rick said in that voice he used when he was pretending to be casual, "can you do me a favor? I need that box of old documents. It's on top of the armoire in the hallway." Madison looked at the armoire, that old, solid wood cabinet she had repeatedly asked him to secure to the wall. She was afraid of it. It was too heavy, too unstable, but Rick always made excuses. Not to call a professional. "Now?" she asked. "Yeah, it's important." Madison hesitated. She was holding Liam, and her heavy belly made any movement difficult. "Can you wait and help me?" "I need it now, honey. It'll just take a second." She glanced at Jessica, who was sitting on the sofa watching everything with that look Madison could never decipher. With a sigh, Madison stood up. She approached the armoire with Liam in her arms. The baby was fussy, whimpering softly. She reached up with one arm, trying to get the box on top. That's when she heard it. A whisper. So quiet she almost thought she'd imagined it. "Now." Madison turned her head, confused, and in that split second, she felt it. The armoire moving, the impossible weight of solid wood tipping toward her. There was no time to think, only instinct. Madison clutched Liam to her chest, shielding his body with hers, and tried to twist away. But she was too slow, too heavy. The world came crashing down on her in a thunder of wood and pain. And the last thought that crossed her mind before everything went dark was, they knew this was going to happen. In his Chicago office, Henry Wallace watched in horror at the live feed from the security camera that had just been installed in his daughter's house. And what he saw in those few seconds changed his life forever. Tell me what you think of this story, and how you think it will end. The pain was all Madison could feel, a pain that came from everywhere at once, as if her body had been shattered and reassembled incorrectly. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids weighed a ton. She tried to move her fingers, but didn't know if they were obeying. There were voices around her, distant as if coming from underwater. We need to intubate now, her sats are dropping. Fetal heart rate is erratic, we need to get this baby out. Page OB, this is an emergency. Madison tried to scream that her baby was okay, that Liam needed her, but no sound came out. The darkness pulled her back, relentless and cold. Before she succumbed completely, a single thought hammered in her mind. They let this happen. They knew. Across town at St. Beatrice Hospital, Henry Wallace sat in a chair in the surgical waiting room. His hands trembled as he held his phone. He had seen everything. Every second of that horror was seared into his memory like an open wound. The way Rick just stood there, watching. Jessica's expression, that smirk she couldn't quite hide. The calculated delay before either of them moved to help. And when they finally did move, it was only because the neighbor was already pounding on the door. Carmen Fisher, a retired nurse who lived 3 houses down, had heard the crash. She had run over and found the door unlocked. She was the one who screamed for help. She was the one who called 911 while trying to free Madison from the wreckage of the armoire. She was the one who held Liam, who was crying hysterically, and made sure the baby was unharmed. And it was Carmen who noticed, in those first chaotic seconds, something that chilled her to the bone. Rick and Jessica weren't desperate. They were surprised, as if something had gone wrong in a carefully laid plan. Henry had arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, catching the first flight from Chicago to Naperville. He found Carmen in the lobby, still holding Liam, who had finally fallen asleep, exhausted in her arms. The nurse looked at him with an expression that mixed pity and anger. "Are you her father?" Carmen asked, her voice low but firm. "I am. How is she?" "In surgery. Head trauma, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. They're doing an emergency C-section." Carmen gripped his arm. "But there's something you need to know. Something I saw." That's how Henry knew his suspicions were founded. Carmen described the scene she found. Rick's coldness, the way Jessica quickly stepped away when the ambulance arrived, and more importantly, she had heard something before the accident. A whisper coming from inside the house. "I was watering my plants in the yard, and their window was open," Carmen explained. "I heard someone say, 'now.' It was very quiet, but I heard it. And seconds later, that horrible noise." Henry's blood ran cold. He had the recording. He had proof of what happened. But he needed Madison to survive to tell her side of the story. He needed her to wake up. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Doctors came and went from the operating room with tense expressions. Finally, after 6 endless hours, the obstetrician came out with a tiny baby wrapped in blankets. "The baby's alive," he said, and Henry felt his knees buckle. "It's a girl. Small, premature, but she's breathing. She'll need the NICU, but she has a good chance." "And my daughter." The doctor hesitated. "She's in a medically induced coma. The injuries were severe. A skull fracture, broken ribs, internal bleeding that we managed to control. We'll keep her sedated for the next few days to give her brain time to recover from the trauma. But Mr. Wallace, I have to be honest, we don't know when or if she'll wake up." Henry closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was a steely determination in his gaze. "Where is her husband?" "In the waiting room on the 2nd floor." Henry walked up the stairs with firm steps, Carmen beside him, still holding Liam. He found Rick sitting in a corner, scrolling on his phone. Jessica was next to him, whispering something. When they saw Henry approaching, they quickly moved apart. "Henry," Rick said, standing up with that look of concern that seemed so fake now. Thank God you're here. It was horrible. The armoire just fell. And I saw, Henry interrupted, his voice as sharp as ice. Rick blinked, confused. You saw? What do you mean? I installed cameras in my daughter's house. I saw everything, every second. The silence that followed was deafening. Rick turned pale. Jessica took a step back. Henry continued, his voice low but charged with a contained fury that made the words vibrate. I saw you ask her to get that box. I saw her hesitate. I saw you insist. And I heard it, Rick. I heard someone whisper now seconds before that armoire fell. He stepped closer. And I saw the two of you just stand there watching my daughter get crushed on the floor while she tried to protect my grandson. Rick tried to speak, but Henry held up a hand. Don't say a word. Nothing you say now can help you. I have it all on tape, every second. And I will make sure you and your accomplice pay for this. Jessica let out a strangled sound. Rick tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes betrayed his panic. You're crazy, he said, but his voice wavered. It was an accident. The armoire was unstable, I always said. I needed to fix it. You refused to fix it. Madison asked you several times, and now I know why. Carmen followed Henry as he turned to leave, but before he did, the businessman shot one last look at his son-in-law. My lawyers will be in touch, and as long as my daughter is in that hospital bed, you will not go near her, or near my grandchildren. I'm getting a restraining order today. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and hospital vigils. Henry hired the best lawyers in Chicago, led by Michael Davis, a respected criminal defense attorney who had been a college friend of Henry's. Michael took the case with fierce determination when he saw the recordings. This is attempted murder, he said, analyzing every frame of the video. Clear premeditation. And from what you've told me about the control he had over her, we're also looking at false imprisonment, psychological abuse, and financial abuse. The investigation began. The police seized Rick and Jessica's phones. They found text messages between them that revealed an affair going back more than 2 years. But more than that, they found conversations about insurance policies, about the assets Rick would inherit if something happened to Madison. They found searches in his browser history for fatal household accidents and how to make it look like an accident. The charade collapsed like a house of cards. Rick had a substantial life insurance policy in Madison's name, of which he was the sole beneficiary. In addition, Madison had a sizable investment fund, an inheritance from her maternal grandmother which would pass to her spouse in the event of her death. All told, Rick stood to gain over $2 million. Jessica, in turn, had her own motives. She wasn't just the mistress. She was Rick's silent partner in a real estate venture that was on the brink of bankruptcy. They needed that money to save their business and start a new life together. Madison was just an obstacle, and in a moment of calculated cruelty, they decided that her advanced pregnancy and Liam's presence would make it all more convincing. A tragic accident during a routine household chore. What they hadn't counted on was Henry and Carmen. While the legal process moved forward, Madison remained in a coma. The doctors gradually reduced her sedation, but she didn't wake up. Her body recovered. From the fractures, the bruises faded, but her mind remained somewhere distant, unreachable. Henry spent every day at the hospital. In the mornings, he visited the NICU where his granddaughter, whom he named Sophia until Madison could decide, fought to gain weight and strength. The baby was tiny, hooked up to tubes and monitors, but every day she got a little stronger. In the afternoons, he sat by Madison's bed. He held her hand and talked to her. He told her about Sophia, about Liam, who was being temporarily cared for by Carmen. He told her about the lawsuit, about how Rick and Jessica were being held accountable. He told her about the apartment he was preparing for when she woke up, with a view of Lincoln Park, close to everything she would need to start over. And he begged. He pleaded for her to come back. It was Michael who brought news that changed everything. On a rainy afternoon in April, he arrived at the hospital with a grim expression. "Henry, we need to talk." They went to the hospital coffee shop. Michael opened his briefcase and showed him documents. "We got more evidence. Conversations between Rick and Jessica from 6 months ago. They've been planning this since then. He hesitated. But there's more. The police found evidence that this wasn't the first attempt. Henry felt his stomach turn. What do you mean? 3 months ago, Madison had that fall down the stairs, remember? Rick said she tripped. I remember, she broke her wrist. We found texts from Jessica asking, did it work? And Rick replying, no, she just broke her wrist. We'll have to think of something else. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. They tried to kill my daughter before, Henry said, his voice a hoarse whisper, and she didn't even know. There's more. Her car. That brake problem Rick said he fixed last month. We had it looked at by forensics. The brakes were tampered with, but Madison stopped driving before anything could happen because Rick convinced her it was dangerous during her pregnancy. Henry covered his face with his hands. Each revelation was a stab to the heart. To think of what his daughter had been through, the web of danger surrounding her without her fully realizing it, was unbearable. We're going to destroy them, he said finally, legally and completely. And they did exactly that. The trial was set for June. Rick and Jessica were arrested and held without bail after all the evidence came to light. The media covered the case extensively. Real estate agent and mistress plotted to murder pregnant wife. The headlines blared. But what no one expected was what happened 2 weeks before the trial. Madison woke up. It was on a quiet morning. Henry was by her bedside, as always, reading the newspaper aloud. He felt that somehow she could hear him, even unconscious. He was reading about the court's decision to grant him temporary custody of Liam and Sophia when he felt a slight squeeze on his hand. He looked down. Madison's fingers moved again. His heart pounded. "Madison? Honey?" She opened her eyes slowly. She was confused, disoriented. Her voice, when it finally came, was hoarse and weak. "Dad? The baby?" Henry held her face in his hands, tears streaming freely. "You're back. Thank God you're back." Madison's recovery was gradual. The doctors had to explain everything that had happened, the accident, the coma, the emergency C-section, but it was Henry who told her the whole truth, with Michael by his side for legal and emotional support. Madison listened to it all in silence. The texts, the insurance, the previous attempts, the coldness of Rick and Jessica. And when Henry mentioned that he had it all on tape, that she hadn't been crazy to be suspicious, something inside her broke and was set free at the same time. She cried. She cried for the woman she had been, for the innocence she had lost, for the love that had been nothing but a cruel lie. But she also cried with relief, because she finally understood that none of it was her fault, that she wasn't crazy, that her suspicions had been right, and most importantly, she had survived. "I want to see my children," she said, her voice firm despite her body's weakness. Henry smiled. "Tomorrow. The doctors said if you were doing well today, you could have visitors tomorrow." But there was something else in Madison's eyes, a determination Henry hadn't seen in years. "And I want to testify. I want to be in that courtroom and look them in the eye as I tell them what I went through." Michael stepped closer. "Madison, you don't have to. We have enough evidence without your testimony. You've been through so much." She looked at him. Michael Davis. She vaguely remembered him from the parties her father used to throw when she was younger. A serious man, but with kind eyes. And now he was here, fighting for her. "I have to," she said firmly. "I need to say out loud everything they made me keep silent. I need them to hear me, and I need to do this for myself." Henry and Michael exchanged a look. They both saw in that moment what Madison was becoming. No longer the silent victim, but the woman choosing her own narrative. The next day, when they brought Liam to see her, Madison held her son in her arms and promised herself she would never let anyone control her life again. Liam, with his big, confused eyes, grabbed her finger and smiled. He was so little when the armoire fell. He wouldn't remember any of it, and she would do everything to make sure he grew up in a home full of love and security. Sophia arrived later, brought in a portable incubator. Madison looked at that tiny child who had fought so hard to live and felt her heart break and mend all at once. Her daughter, her little warrior. "Hi, Sophia," she whispered, placing her hand on the incubator's clear cover. "Mommy's here now, and I'm never going to leave you again." Carmen came to visit too, bringing flowers and a warm smile. The two women hugged, and Madison thanked her over and over for her children's lives. "You saved my babies," Madison said, crying. "You saved our family." "I just did what any decent person would do," Carmen replied. "And if you ever need anything, I'll be here, always." While Madison recovered physically, Michael prepared the case. He visited the hospital daily, always kind, always patient. He brought documents when necessary, but mostly he brought company. They talked about life, about new beginnings, about strength and resilience. And Madison started to notice the way he looked at her, the extra care in every gesture, the genuine concern in his eyes. Michael had always been her father's proper friend, the serious professional lawyer. But there was something more there, something he had kept to himself for a long time. One afternoon, after a meeting about the case, Madison asked him directly, "Michael, why are you doing all of this? I mean, besides being my dad's friend?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Because I care, Madison. I always have." "Since when?" "Since that New Year's Eve party 10 years ago. You were 18, just started college. We talked about architecture and design all night. You were brilliant, passionate, full of dreams." He smiled sadly. "And I was 20 years older, your father's friend. I kept that feeling to myself because it was the right thing to do. And then you met Rick and I thought you'd be happy." Madison felt something stir inside her. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was too soon for that. But it was recognition, respect, and maybe with time it could become something more. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me." "I never would," he replied. The weeks passed. Madison gained strength. She started physical therapy, relearned how to walk without pain, and regained her physical independence. And with every step, she also regained her inner strength. The trial was approaching, and Madison was ready to face her demons head-on. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold in Naperville. Madison woke up, early in the apartment Henry had rented near the hospital, to make the constant visits to Sophia, who still needed care in the NICU, easier. Liam was asleep in the next room, and she could hear her son's quiet breathing through the slightly open door. That simple sound was a constant reminder of why she was doing this. She got up slowly, still feeling twinges in her ribs that had been fractured. The doctors said the pain would lessen with time, but some scars would remain forever, not just the physical ones. Madison looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She was thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was something different in her gaze, a determination that had never been there before. She put on the navy blue suit Michael had helped her pick out, something sober, respectable, that conveyed seriousness. She tied her hair back in a simple bun. She didn't want drama, she just wanted the truth. Henry knocked on the door at 7:30. "Ready, honey?" Madison took a deep breath. "Ready." The DuPage County Courthouse was packed when they arrived. The media had taken an interest in the case, and reporters with cameras and microphones swarmed the entrance. Michael guided them through a side entrance, shielding Madison from the flashing lights and shouted questions. Inside the courtroom, Madison felt her heart pound. There was Rick, sitting next to his lawyer, wearing an impeccable grey suit. When he saw her walk in, his eyes widened. It was the first time they had seen each other since the day of the accident. Madison held his gaze without flinching. There was no fear there anymore, only the coldness of someone who knew the truth. Jessica was at another table with her own defense team. She looked smaller than Madison remembered, her hair pulled back and wearing no makeup. She tried not to look at Madison, but when their eyes met for a second, Madison saw something that surprised her. It wasn't remorse, it was anger. Anger that they had been caught. The judge entered and everyone rose. Judge Albert Miller was a middle-aged man known for his impartiality and strictness. He opened the session with the usual formalities, and then the prosecutor began his opening statement. The evidence was presented one by one. The text messages between Rick and Jessica, explicit in their intent. The records of the insurance policies. The technical reports on the armoire showing that the screws meant to secure it to the wall had been deliberately removed. Rick's computer search history. And finally, the recording. Madison watched the scene unfold on the large screen in the courtroom. She saw herself entering the room with Liam in her arms, saw Rick asking for the box, saw her own hesitation. And then she heard that whisper. Now. The sound was faint, but forensics had amplified and confirmed it. It was Jessica's voice, the armoire falling, her body shielding Liam, the delay from Rick, and Jessica in reacting, Carmen bursting in, frantic. There was absolute silence in the room when the video ended. Even the reporters seemed shocked. Rick's lawyer tried to argue that the messages were just venting, that they didn't prove real intent, that the armoire falling was an unfortunate accident, that the whisper could be misinterpreted, that the delay in helping was just the shock of the situation. But then it was time for Madison's testimony. She stood and walked to the witness stand with steady steps, despite the pain. She swore to tell the truth with her hand on the Bible, and sat in the chair facing the crowded room. Michael approached to lead her through her testimony. His eyes conveyed silent encouragement. "Madison, can you tell the court what your married life was like?" And Madison told them. She told them about the move to Naperville, about how she gradually lost contact with friends and family, about the bank passwords Rick controlled, about the car she was prevented from using, about her father's visits that were constantly postponed, about Jessica showing up more and more, about the looks they exchanged that Madison pretended not to see because she wanted to believe she was mistaken. "I felt like I was going crazy," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Every day I woke up thinking I was imagining things, that I was paranoid, that the pregnancy hormones were making me see problems where there were none." She looked directly at Rick. "But I wasn't crazy. I was right all along." Rick's lawyer tried to discredit her during cross-examination. "Mrs. Thompson, don't you think you might be exaggerating? Perhaps the stress of pregnancy, postpartum depression from your first child. All of that could have distorted your perception." Madison looked at him with a calmness that surprised even herself. "No, sir. Stress and hormones didn't make me imagine text messages that exist, insurance policies that were taken out, or an armoire that was deliberately left unsecured to fall on me. Forensic science proves all of that. My perception was absolutely correct." Carmen also testified, describing what she heard and saw. Her credibility as a retired nurse and the clarity of her testimony were devastating for the defense. Henry took the stand and spoke about the signs he had noticed, about the father's intuition that led him to install the cameras. "I knew my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw the light going out in her with every phone call. I knew something was deeply wrong." Technical experts confirmed the tampering with the car's brakes. Medical examiners detailed Madison's injuries in a way that made it clear it would have been impossible to survive that accident without severe consequences, if not for the way she protected her own head at the last second, sacrificing her body. And then came the moment that changed the entire trial. Rick and Jessica began to turn on each other. Jessica's lawyer, in a desperate attempt to reduce his client's sentence, presented new messages the police had recovered. Messages where Rick manipulated Jessica, promising her a future together, saying Madison was a temporary obstacle. "It was all his idea," the lawyer argued. "My client was manipulated by an older, more experienced man." Rick exploded. He shot up from his chair, ignoring his own lawyer trying to calm him down. "My idea? You were desperate for the money. You were the one who suggested the insurance policy." Jessica turned to him, her eyes blazing. "Because you said if we didn't get that money, we'd lose everything. You promised it would be quick, that no one would find out." The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. The masks had completely fallen off. There, in front of everyone, the picture-perfect couple revealed the rot they had been hiding. Madison watched it all with a mixture of horror and relief. Horror for what she had almost suffered, relief that she had escaped, and a deep sadness for having loved someone who never really existed. The Rick she had known was just a performance. The real man was right there, showing his true face. The closing arguments were a mere formality. The prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence for attempted murder, with aggravating factors for it being against a vulnerable and pregnant person. The defense tried to argue for reduced sentences, but without conviction. When the judge announced he would recess to deliberate, Madison finally let the tears fall. Michael sat beside her and held her hand. "You were incredible," he whispered. "So strong." "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel exhausted." Strength isn't about not getting tired. It's about keeping going even when you are. 2 hours later, the judge returned. The room fell silent as he began to read the verdict. Guilty. Both of them. Guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and psychological and financial abuse. Rick was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Jessica to 15 years, with the mitigating factor of having been partially manipulated, though her active participation was undeniable. Madison felt her shoulders relax. It was over. It was finally over. Across the room, Rick tried to look at her one last time, but Madison had turned away. He didn't even deserve her gaze. The following days were a whirlwind of interviews, news reports, and recognition. Madison's story became a symbol of survival and courage. Women from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories of abusive relationships, of control disguised as love, of silent violence. Madison realized her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to thousands of women living in prisons they didn't even realize they were in, and that gave her a new purpose. But first, she needed to take care of herself and her children. Sophia was finally discharged from the NICU in July, 3 months after she was born. She was a small but healthy baby with a pair of lungs that proved her strength every time she cried for attention. Madison held her daughter in her arms as she left the hospital and knew that this was the real beginning. Henry kept his promise. He bought a spacious apartment in Chicago near Lincoln Park. 3 bedrooms, a large living room with a balcony, natural light pouring in through every window. Madison decorated each room with care, rediscovering her love for interior design. Every choice was hers, every decision hers, and that made all the difference. Liam adapted well. At just 2 years old, he was too young to fully understand what had happened, but he could tell that his mommy was happier. Carmen moved into an apartment in the same building at Henry's invitation to be close and help when needed. The nurse became part of the family, a chosen grandmother for the children. Madison began intensive physical therapy. Her body had permanent marks from the accident, but she was alive, and that's what mattered. The sessions were painful, but every small bit of progress was a victory. Relearning to run after Liam, being able to carry Sophia without pain, small achievements that meant freedom. It was Michael who suggested she go back to work. "You have a gift, Madison. It would be a shame to waste it." They were having coffee at a shop near her apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Michael had been visiting her regularly, always with some excuse. He needed to discuss details of the case. He had documents for her to sign. He wanted to see how the kids were doing, but they both knew the visits were about more than that. "I don't know if I'm ready," Madison admitted. "I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, with nightmares about falling." Armoise. "No one expects you to be perfect, but you deserve to do something you love, something that's just yours." Madison considered it. She missed creating, transforming empty spaces into welcoming homes, picking up a pencil and paper and drawing until her mind went quiet. "Maybe," she said, slowly. And that's what she did. She started small, redesigning Carmen's apartment as a favor. Then she did Henry's office. Then a friend of Carmen's asked for help with her living room, and gradually word of mouth did its work. In December, exactly 9 months after the accident, Madison opened her own studio. New Beginnings Interior Design was located in a charming commercial space in Wicker Park. It was small, but it was hers, completely hers. The opening was simple, just close family and friends. Henry made an emotional toast, Carmen brought brownies, and Michael gave Madison a carefully wrapped gift. It was a painting, a watercolor showing a woman from behind, looking out at an open horizon, with 2 small children by her side. to remember where you came from and where you can go," he said softly. Madison felt her eyes well up. "It's beautiful, Michael. Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "Madison, I know it's still soon. I know you've been through terrible things and you need time, but I want you to know that I'll be here. No rush, no pressure, just here." Madison looked at this man who had been by her side through the worst moments, who had helped her get back on her feet without asking for anything in return, who looked at her as if she were the most incredible person in the world, even when she felt broken. She wasn't ready to love again. The wounds were still too fresh, but maybe with time, she could learn to trust again, to open her heart again. And if it was going to be with anyone, Michael would be a safe choice. "Thank you," she said, holding his hand for a moment, "for waiting." The following months were a time of quiet rebuilding. Madison woke up early, took Liam to preschool, visited Sophia at the nursery, and then went to her studio to work. Every project was an affirmation of her independence. Every satisfied client, proof of her talent. She went to therapy. A lot of therapy. She talked about the trauma, about the guilt she felt for not realizing sooner, about the fear that sometimes still paralyzed her. But she also talked about hope, about new beginnings, about allowing herself to be happy again. Rick and Jessica were in prison, where they would remain for many years. Madison no longer thought about them. They were part of a closed chapter of her life, a painful chapter, but one that taught her valuable lessons about strength, about intuition, about never ignoring that inner voice that whispers that something is wrong. One night in April, almost a year after the trial, Madison was at home organizing portfolios when the phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I know this is last minute, but would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? A new Italian place opened up near your apartment. They say it's really good." Madison looked around her living room, the photos of Liam and Sophia on the wall, the painting Michael had given her, the plants she lovingly tended to. Her life, rebuilt brick by brick, and she realized she was ready. Not for something big and intense, but for small steps, for a dinner, for a conversation, for allowing someone kind to enter her life slowly and with respect. "I'd love that," she replied. And when she hung up, Madison smiled to herself. The woman who had almost died in that suffocating house in Naperville no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more aware of her own worth. The armoire that fell on her was meant to crush her, but instead it only set her free. The Italian restaurant was cozy that April evening. Candles flickered on the tables, and the aroma of basil and roasted garlic filled the air. Madison arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a simple but elegant dark green dress. She felt nervous, like a teenager on a first date, which was absurd considering everything she had already lived through. But there she was, with sweaty palms and a racing heart. Michael walked in promptly at 8. When his eyes met hers across the room, he smiled in that way that made crinkles appear at the corners of his eyes. It was a genuine, warm smile, with no hidden agendas or manipulations. Madison smiled back, feeling some of the tension melt away. "You look beautiful," he said, as he sat down, and there was no exaggeration in his voice, just sincerity. "Thank you, you look nice too." They ordered wine and risotto and talked about everyday things. Madison's new project for a dental clinic, a difficult case Michael was defending, how Liam had learned a new song at preschool, how Sophia was sleeping better through the night. But then, as they shared a tiramisu, Michael grew serious. "Madison, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" The question caught her by surprise, not because of the question itself, but because she realized she had to think about the answer. Before she would have said yes automatically, without question. Now she truly considered it. "You know," she began slowly, "for a long time, I didn't know what real happiness was. I thought it was having the right house, the right husband, the life that looked perfect on the outside. But all of that was just an empty shell." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Today, I wake up every morning knowing that every decision I make is my own. that no one is controlling my passwords, my movements, my life. And yes, that makes me happy. Maybe not in the euphoric way we imagine when we're young, but in a deeper, more solid way. Michael watched her with that complete attention few people can give. And is there room for more happiness in this new life? Madison held her wineglass, feeling the weight of the question. It would be easy to say no, that she wasn't ready yet, that she needed more time. But when she looked at Michael, she saw only patience and affection. There was no pressure, no demands, just a possibility being offered without any rush. "I think so," she answered softly. "But I need you to understand that I'm still rebuilding. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and have to check that the doors are locked 3 times. Sometimes I see a man in a suit on the street and my heart races because for a second I think it's him, even though I know he's in prison." "I know," Michael said, reaching his hand across the table. Madison placed hers on top of it. "And I don't expect you to be perfect. I just hope you'll let me be by your side while you continue to heal." That night, when Michael dropped her off at home and they said goodbye with a chaste kiss on the cheek, Madison walked into her apartment feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the naive hope that everything would be easy, but the realistic hope that good things could still happen if she allowed them to. The following months brought gradual but significant changes. Michael and Madison started seeing each other more, always respecting her pace. He took her to art exhibits. She invited him to family dinners. Henry approved completely, having known his friend's character for decades. Carmen was always making comments about how Michael looked at Madison, and how Madison, without realizing it, had started smiling more when he was around. Liam adored Michael from the start. The boy, now 3, called him Uncle Mike, and always asked when he was coming to visit. Sophia, at 1.5, was too little to understand much, but she also smiled when Michael picked her up and made funny faces. Madison's studio thrived. She had more projects than she could handle and was considering hiring an assistant. Every space she created carried her personal touch, spaces that breathed, that had light, that made people feel safe and welcomed. It was as if she were designing not just for her clients, but also as therapy for herself. Every home she transformed was a way of rewriting her own story. In August, 2 years after the accident, Madison received an unexpected invitation. A non-profit organization that worked with women in situations of domestic violence asked her to give a speech. They wanted her to share her story, to show other women that it was possible to start over. Madison hesitated. Speaking publicly about her trauma felt too exposing, like reliving pains she was learning to keep in a place where they didn't hurt as much. But then she thought of the messages she received almost daily, women who had read about her case and found the courage to report abuse, women who saw her as an example that survival was possible. How could she refuse to help when she had the platform to make a difference? "I'll do it," she told Michael the night she received the invitation. They were at his apartment, watching a movie after the kids had fallen asleep at Henry's, who had insisted on having his grandkids so they could have a quiet night. "Are you sure? You don't have to feel obligated." "I know, but I want to. I need to. For all the women who are still where I was, who feel crazy, who doubt themselves, who don't know they have the strength to leave." The speech took place in September, in a packed auditorium. Madison walked onto the stage with trembling hands, but when she started to speak, the words flowed. She told them about the gradual control, about how love can disguise itself as a prison, about the signs she ignored because she wanted to believe in a fairy tale, about the accident that almost took her life and her children's. But she also spoke about rebuilding, about how she refused to be defined by what happened to her, about how every day was a conscious choice to live, truly live, not just exist. When she finished, the silence lasted for a few seconds. Then the applause began, and several women in the audience were crying. After the speech, dozens of them came to talk to Madison, sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking her for speaking out. It was in that moment that Madison fully understood. Her suffering had not been in vain. If her story could save even one life, if it could give one woman the strength to leave an abusive relationship, then it was worth sharing. In October, Michael asked her to marry him. It was nothing grand or theatrical. They were having a picnic in Lincoln Park with the kids. Liam was chasing pigeons while Sophia was trying to eat grass, and Madison had to pull it out of her mouth every 5 seconds. Michael was sitting beside her, watching the scene with a smile. "You know I love you, right?" he said suddenly. Madison looked at him, surprised but not shocked. They hadn't said those words yet, waiting for the right moment. "I know," she replied, "and I love you too." "Then marry me." There was no ring, no getting down on one knee, just a sincere request from a man who wanted to build a life with her. Madison looked at him, at that honest and kind face, and realized she wasn't afraid. Not like before. This time she knew how to recognize real love. "Yes," she said, "but with a few conditions." Michael laughed. "Always the negotiator, what are they?" "My money stays separate. My career is as much a priority as yours, and if I ever say I'm uncomfortable with something, you listen to me, no questions asked." "Agreed on all counts. Anything else?" "Yes, I want a small wedding. Just close family and friends. No big production." "Perfect for me." Liam came running back just then, jumping into Michael's lap. "Uncle Mike, did you see how many pigeons I found?" Michael hugged the boy. "I did, champ, and I have some news for you and your sister. I'm going to marry your mom. What do you think?" Liam thought for a moment, then smiled in that pure, unfiltered way only kids can. "Cool. Are you going to live with us?" "If you'll have me." "You can, but you have to share your toys with me." Madison laughed, feeling her heart so full it felt like it would overflow. This was her family, chosen, built on a solid foundation of respect and true love. The wedding took place in December, in an intimate ceremony in the garden of Henry's house. Madison wore a simple champagne-colored dress with delicate lace on the shoulders. Liam was the ring-bearer, carrying the rings with pride. Sophia, in Carmen's arms, drooled on her outfit, but looked beautiful anyway. When Michael and Madison exchanged vows, they weren't the traditional ones. They wrote their own, words that meant something real to both of them. "I promise to respect your independence," Michael said. "I promise to listen when you speak, to believe you when you feel something is wrong, and to never make you doubt your own sanity. I promise to be your partner, not your controller, your support, not your prison. I promise to love you and your children as you deserve to be loved." Madison had tears streaming down her face when it was her turn. "I promise to trust again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise not to let my past poison our future. I promise to be brave enough to be vulnerable with you because I know you deserve it. And I promise we will build something real, honest, and full of light, because that's what we deserve." Henry cried openly throughout the entire ceremony. Carmen needed 3 tissues, and when the Justice of the Peace declared them married, the few guests applauded with genuine joy. Life after the wedding was surprisingly normal, and Madison loved it for exactly that reason. Normality was a privilege she had learned to value. Michael moved into her apartment, or rather their apartment now. They turned the office into a room for him to work in. Madison kept her studio. They shared household chores, took turns picking up the kids from school, and had dinner together every night whenever possible. And they fought, of course they fought, about normal things like any couple, about who forgot to buy milk, about which movie to watch, about raising the kids. But the fights were healthy, honest, and always ended with conversations where they both listened to each other. Madison still had hard days. Days when she woke up from nightmares and had to check all the locks. Days when she saw news about domestic violence and had to turn off the TV because it was too much to process. But now she had someone who held her hand through those moments without judgment. Rick and Jessica remained in prison. Madison learned from Michael that Rick had tried to appeal his sentence, but it was denied. She no longer felt anything for them. Not anger, not sadness, just indifference. They were characters from a book she had read a long time ago and left on the shelf. In March of the following year, 3 years after the accident, Madison launched a special project. Together with the non-profit that had invited her to speak, she created an interior design program for women's shelters. The idea was to transform those institutional spaces into welcoming environments where women and children could begin to feel safe again. Environments affect how we feel, she explained at the project presentation. If you're in a cold institutional place, it's hard to start healing, but if you're in a space with light, color, and comfort, you start to believe that good things are possible. The project gained media attention and donors. Within 6 months, Madison had already transformed 5 shelters. Each one had her signature touch: soft colors, comfortable furniture, small details that made all the difference, inspirational art, plants, play areas for the children. And in each project, she saw a bit of her own journey reflected. She saw women starting to smile again, children laughing, hope blooming where there had once been only despair. Liam started kindergarten. Sophia learned to walk and then to run, and now Madison spent her days chasing a small tornado of energy. Henry partially retired to have more time with his grandkids and was constantly spoiling the children to the point where Madison had to regularly intervene. Carmen became the official grandmother. She taught Madison recipes, told stories to the kids, and always showed up with some homemade cake or dessert. It was the family Madison had always wanted, but never imagined she could have. One evening in June, Madison was at her studio working late on a project when Michael called. "Still working?" "Finishing up some sketches. I'll be home in half an hour." "The kids are already asleep. I made that pasta you like for dinner. It's waiting for you." Madison smiled. "Thanks for taking care of them." "Maddie, they're our kids. It's not taking care of them. It's being a dad." She hung up with a warm heart. Our kids. Michael never made a distinction. He treated Liam and Sophia as his own from day one. And the kids loved him unconditionally. When she got home, she found Michael in the kitchen washing dishes. She hugged him from behind. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being you, for being patient, for teaching me that love doesn't have to hurt." He turned and kissed her forehead. "You're the one who taught me what true strength is. I should be thanking you." They ate dinner, talking about their day, about future plans, about the little life they had built together, and Madison realized something fundamental. She was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. 4 years after the accident, Madison was invited for an interview on a national television show about overcoming adversity. She accepted, thinking of all the women who still needed to hear that a new beginning was possible. During the interview, the host asked, "Madison, if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to the woman you were before the accident, what would you say?" Madison thought carefully before answering. "I would say, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own sanity. Your intuition is your greatest ally." She paused. "And I would say that being strong doesn't mean enduring everything in silence. Being strong is knowing when to ask for help. It's having the courage to leave, even when it seems impossible. It's choosing yourself, always." And for the women watching now who might be in similar situations, I would say you are not alone and you are not crazy. If your partner controls your money, isolates you from friends and family, makes you question your own memory or perception, that is not love. It is abuse. And you deserve more, your children deserve more. Madison looked directly into the camera. It might seem scary to leave. It might seem impossible. But it is possible. And there are people waiting to help. Organizations, shelters, professionals. You just have to take the first step. And I promise you, it's worth it. After that interview, Madison's studio was flooded with messages. Women thanking her, sharing their stories, asking for guidance. And Madison answered every single one. Because she knew what it was like to be in that dark place, thinking there was no way out. On her 5th anniversary of starting over, Madison hosted a dinner at her home. Henry was there, proud of the daughter he had raised. Carmen brought her famous key lime pie. Michael cooked because he had discovered he enjoyed it. Liam, now 7, helped set the table. Sophia, 5, made the drawings that decorated the walls. When everyone was seated, Madison raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said. "5 years ago I was in a place so dark I thought I would never see the light again. But here I am, surrounded by people who truly love me, doing work that matters, living a life I chose." Her tears fell, but they were happy tears. "Nothing I went through was easy, but it brought me here, and I wouldn't trade where I am now for anything." Everyone toasted, and Madison looked around the table. Her father, who never gave up on her, Carmen, who saved her life, Michael, who showed her that true love exists, and her children, who were her reason to keep going every day. The house didn't have a perfect lawn or a commercial-worthy white picket fence, but it had genuine laughter. It had honest conversations. It had true love. And that was worth more than any perfect facade. Madison had learned the hard way that appearances are deceiving, that perfection is a lie, and that real strength comes from within. She had learned that starting over isn't weakness, it's courage, that asking for help isn't shame, it's wisdom, and that surviving isn't enough, you have to live. And she was living, finally, completely, living. The shadows that once dominated her house no longer had any power. The silence and submission had given way to strength and hope. And Madison knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. Because she had learned the most important lesson of all. She was the author of her own story. And that story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. End of story. Hey everyone, we hope Madison's story touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming and starting anew, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. This is a story about strength, survival, and the courage to rebuild your life when all seems lost. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and reminding us that it's always possible to start over. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of those who need it most. We'll see you in the next episode.